all these little things.
And we are recording.
If you want to promote the attendees, you can, Thomas. Hello to those that have joined early. We're going to wait a few minutes for others to join. Hi, everyone. We're going to wait just another couple of minutes for a few more folks to join us. So thank you for your patience.
And Jennifer, how many registrants did we end up for the meeting?
We had 34.
Okay, great. I'm sure we'll have a few late arrivers.
Yeah, I think we could just wait maybe one more minute and then we could get started with introductions. Shall we wait another minute or would you like to get started, Jeff?
Why don't we wait till 6:04 and then we can get started, Jen.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks everyone for hanging in there just a couple more minutes before we get rolling. Okay, with 6:04. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight for Hillside Park Community Meeting number 2. It's wonderful to see so many participants from the neighborhood. Tonight's meeting is a report out of some of the feedback that we have heard during previous engagement and the online survey, as well as an opportunity for us to share what we have learned about the park site since that time. Our meeting tonight will consist of a PowerPoint presentation along with multiple opportunities for you to join us in discussion and also ask questions. This meeting is being recorded, and the meeting materials as well as other information will get posted to our webpage, which is issaquah.gov, Hillside Play Area, early next week. So if someone who couldn't join us tonight who would be interested in the materials present, you can refer them to the website next week to view the recording. Before we begin, I would like to just take a quick minute to have everyone kind of orient themselves to the meeting platform so you know where things are. We will be using the chat function tonight, so please check and make sure you can find that on your screen. For those joining by your computer or smartphone, you should be able to see a layout option in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. From there, you can change it to whether you want to see all of the attendees for those who have their video on, or if you just want to see a presentation screen. As an attendee, you have been promoted to a panelist, as you may notice. We want to encourage everyone to participate and have feedback, but we do request that you keep yourselves muted unless you're called upon to speak. It makes it hard for others to hear, and we get a lot of background noise. Also, like I said, we will be using the chat, so please have it go to all panelists or everyone, and we will be sure to capture that. So there is a drop-down menu in the chat box itself. So please make sure you pull up everyone so you can enter the chat for us all to see. We do ask that if you do want to make a comment during the evening that you unmute yourself, but also say your name. So we all know who you are, and maybe those that have called into the meeting can also know who's speaking at any given time. For those of you who are joining us via phone, you can also make comments by pressing *3 on your phone. So is anyone having any issues or have any questions at this point in time? Okay. If we're good, then I am going to pass the baton over to Jeff Watling, Parks and Community Services Director, to say a few words of introduction and get our meeting kicked off. Jeff?
Jen, thanks so much, and thank you everyone for attending. Jen, in fact, if you want to start the presentation, we can get going on that as I give some further introduction. Again, I think Jennifer certainly laid out our intent while we're here. We're really here to share with you what we've heard, in a lot of ways confirm what we've heard. We want to make sure that the themes that we're going to lay out are really consistent with what you shared with us, and the feedback that you shared with us is reflected and represented in this information. Truly, this is such a unique park, and I think in many ways, like any public project, and I've had the pleasure of being in public service for 20 some years now and doing many park projects, but I found them all to be unique and really ones that are well done. The community engagement really helps to inform the scope of the project, and I think that's certainly a goal of ours in this work. So along with Jennifer and I want to introduce two members of the consultant team. Christian Runge is here, landscape architect with Methuen. Thanks so much, Christian. As well, we have George Rashat, associate scientist with Herrera Environmental. Thanks so much, George, for being with us. Also in attendance, one of our city council members, Barb D. Michelle. Thanks so much, Barb, for being here and attending this. I'll also point out two of our park board members are in attendance as well. Park board chair Brad Book and Brenda Spears, park board member, is joining us as well. So thank you all for being here. You want to go next slide, Jen? You'll see this is our sort of our comment slide throughout the presentation, and I think just we want to certainly exemplify Hillside Park is an immensely special place, and I think one of the great blessings of Issaquah is, yes, we have multiple neighborhood parks, but no neighborhood park is the same in this community, and interesting that we're doing work at Blackberry Park with that neighborhood, and just those two parks alone are so uniquely different, and just want to make sure and reiterate the path that we're on, the work that we're going to be doing with you is unique and is different from that of Blackberry, as it should be, as the neighborhoods are different. Next slide. So the agenda tonight, won't spend too much time on this, but I think we certainly reiterated, we want to share with you what we've heard and what we've learned through both the engagement and the site analysis work that we've done. What we want to do in sharing the engagement, what we've heard, is really focus on 4 central themes and really confirm those central themes that we heard from you and from others. And then certainly share some of the work that we've begun doing within these themes. And again, get some confirmation of direction and begin to, I think, open up discussion, answer questions in regards to these themes. A lot of what we're going to be doing tonight is going to feel more like an informational meeting, and it really is. I want to make sure that all of you in attendance know that we're not expecting tonight to be the only time for feedback. We really want to share this information, and then, as you'll see in next steps, provide opportunity in the coming weeks to begin to get feedback and feedback from you. We know and understand information takes a while to process, and for any of us to process. So we welcome feedback tonight, but as you'll see, we're also going to welcome feedback in a variety of ways in the coming weeks that we'll cover through next steps. So what we're going to do with these 4 themes is take an opportunity to dive a little deeper into each one, and then have a chance to pause after each theme, have discussion, answer any questions that you might have. I'm going to highlight these themes in the next slide. So rather than doing it here, I'll wait and dive a little deeper into those in the next slide. So next slide, Jen. Or Thomas, sorry. Hey, I want to thank Thomas as well. Thomas Rush with our communications team. Thank you for being here and assisting in the effort. Sorry for the delayed intro there, Thomas. All right, so really 2 primary sources that we've gained for getting feedback from you. I must say, virtual public meetings are they certainly work. They're not always the most elegant, but I must say participation is certainly in many ways been stronger. We had 58 attendees for our first community meeting. So appreciated the feedback and discussion we had that night. We also have had a chance to take a look at the community discussion that occurred in 2014. That it really has also greatly informed the work that we've had. And then even after that community meeting, we had an online survey that even got more responses, over 200 responses. Again, very, very helpful. A great wealth of feedback. That feedback is available on our project webpage, along with the recording of the community meeting. If you weren't able to attend that or are curious, all that information is on site. All the information that you're going to receive tonight as well will be posted onto that webpage. I think where I want to focus my time, next slide, is really more starting to tee up these themes, and then really allowing Jennifer and the consultant team to start to dive a little deeper. So each of these themes really were strong threads that came out in your feedback. The first theme was really unanimous in many ways. Some of these themes had mixed opinions and mixed responses, but it was fairly universal. Hillside Park is special, and the natural environment, the natural character of the park greatly defines that space, and really strong desire to keep that natural character, to allow that natural character to remain central and special to this space. Retaining the healthy trees. You'll hear a little bit further as we go deeper into this, some of the tree inventory work that we did to make sure that we're really able to meet that goal and retaining the trees. The second theme that we heard also had a lot of common ground and a lot of consensus around this theme of access, both in terms of understanding and keeping this as a neighborhood park and as a walk-in park. But as a walk-in park, how might we enhance some of the interior trails within the park? And how might we also maybe formalize some of the access needs that have occurred in the park historically? And namely, one example is the access through Upper Hillside Cemetery. We'll share with you a little bit further some of the work that we've done last year as we were working with the cemetery board and working on some planning efforts with the cemetery, where we think there's some real opportunities to formalize a trail connection and not disrupt the use and function of the cemetery, but create some additional park access into this park area and create a much safer alternative than walking on Olympus at this time. So access, again, was a real strong thread of feedback that we heard. The third theme that we heard had to do with the field. And this is the existing field, very, very clearly spoken from the feedback that the field, the drop-in activities that are allowed to occur, the needed sort of flat lawn space, the community lawn that this provides is invaluable and a high priority to preserve that field space. And quite frankly, look at ways to improve the drainage that has historically been a bit of a problem seasonally in portions of the field. So to maybe further encourage year-round use. You'll hear some of the site analysis work that we did. Like any solution, you need to define what the problem is before you run to doing solutions. So we did some site analysis to really try and get a sense of what is going on with the drainage issues on that field. So you'll be hearing more about that later on. These first three themes, I'm going to pause here, and that I want to recognize that in a lot of ways, these three themes had a lot of consensus, and in many ways, I think reflect common ground that we heard amongst the neighborhood and amongst the respondents. The fourth theme, additional play amenities, and how might we incorporate additional play amenities, probably represents much more of a mixed opinion and a mixed position, and it's important that we recognize that. Nearly split down the middle was this feeling of, yeah, we would love some additional play amenities in that park, versus some other really strong opinions saying, we don't want any additional play amenities. We don't want a playground plopped into this park. And so you'll hear a little bit more about how we might consider approaching that. I think and certainly our work, and in many ways our job, and hearing neighbors expressing such different opinions for their neighborhood park, we want to try and see if there's ways to create options that are sensitive to those that don't want play, but also find creative ways of maybe incorporating some play into the park. Try and find some win-wins versus when you have such a split position that you're hearing from the community. We don't want to try and create, okay, who's going to win and who's going to lose. Maybe there's some ways that we can find some balance. So you'll hear a little bit more about that as the team. So that's a real quick introduction to these strong threads that we heard from your feedback. And I think right now is probably a good time to pass that over to Jennifer and the consultant team to take a little deeper dive into each of these themes. Jen, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, theme number one was natural character. And again, as Jeff mentioned, this is one thing everyone agrees on, is how special Hillside Park is and what love for the character and the feel people get while in the space and using Hillside Park. One of the unique experiences that was really profound is that it's a walk-in park. People really enjoy that it is somewhat secretive in that you have to walk there. You have to discover it. That is part of the mystery and the joy that comes with this park. There's also a real appreciation for the open space. You feel protected, but yet open to explore nature and to provide some activities in there and connect with nature. You know, as Jeff mentioned, trails and the having areas and natural woods to explore and play in is really important, but also that woodsy feel, which is why members of the community live on Squawk Mountain, right? They like being in that wooded environment, and there's this real pulse to experience nature and to be one with that. One of the other natural character elements that came out was really, to retain healthy trees. And as we approached this project, it was our intent to always preserve trees. And we had done a tree inventory out there so we could understand the health of each of the trees. And at this time, I would like to welcome Christian Rungji to join us to help share some of what the arborist findings that are depicted here in this slide are. So with that, Christian, I'll give you a couple of moments here.
Thanks, Jennifer. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to just briefly summarize some of the findings from the Herrera arborists who went on site and did a tree assessment of the area that's bound by this light blue aqua line and shape. If you recall, some of you may have been in the previous community meeting, we looked at a couple different potential areas for play amenities, as well as access points for interior trails and enhancements of those trails. And so we focused the arborist's attention on those zones. They're within that blue, and then these three yellow shapes are the three areas we were considering for potential play amenities. So we wanted to understand the health of the trees in those locations in particular as a focus area for this project at this time. And just a couple highlights from this. So it's a little hard to read, but you'll see a bunch of dots on the screen. There are some orange dots, red dots, and what those signify are trees that are extreme or high risk trees. And an extreme risk tree is one where failure is imminent and it has a high likelihood of having some impact, and the consequences of that impact are pretty severe, as you can imagine. So mitigation would be required regardless of any development. It's something we want to take care of right away. So there are a few trees out there, in particular within the development areas, and then outside of it. For instance, on the south side of the site, there's a pretty declining alder, for instance, that's really ready to come down at any moment. So we'll want to look at taking care of those regardless of any other conversation. And then a lot of the orange trees are also high risk, so the consequences are still pretty significant. The likelihood of failure is possible. In these cases, some of these trees naturally decline over a long period of time, so they could fall tomorrow or they could fall 50 or 100 years from now. But some risk has to be assessed by the Parks Department and the community with some of those trees, weighing against ecological significance too. So there are a few trees within the development areas that are like that, some really large big leaf maples that provide a lot of ecological value, even though they, as big leaf maples do, tend to decline over time. So they really provide a lot of function in their old age, but also present hazards if we were to provide more access to those areas for whatever purpose. So at this point in time, we've only really done an analysis of what the existing conditions are like. We haven't made any determinations about what should be done with those trees. And this is just an overview of sort of what the statuses of that community of trees is in this particular area.
Thank you, Christian. I see we just got a comment. Where on the map is the entrance? The entrance to the park, I don't know if you can see my cursor, is down in the lower portion of the green squiggly line that's outlining all of the trees. It's on the southern edge, kind of where all these houses are. It's right in the middle here. Can you see my cursor? Okay. So here's the walk-in entrance to orient folks.
So, and just briefly, the site one is sort of within the cedars that are out there, and they're in generally good health. The root areas are obviously a little bit compacted from walking on top of them. Site two is the open right field, so to speak, which is mostly alders and a handful of maples in okay shape. And then on the site 3 is kind of down the hill in that sort of woodsy clearing that has a number of mature big leaf maples and quite a few alders and maples along the hill slope there.
Great. Thank you, Christian. Let's see. So at this time, as we want to take a quick break and give everyone a chance to see if we got it right. Did we hear some of the comments and the characteristics and what keeps Hillside Park special, but also to provide an opportunity if you have any questions about some of the trees and the health. As I stated, the arborist report will be posted to our website next week. But if you have a question, I would like to take this time when for you to type in the chat box to everyone, either the word question and we will call on you, or you can type your entire question in the chat box. So we'll just pause for a moment if anyone has any questions that they would like answered at this time. If not, we'll continue moving on with the presentation.
Hey, Jen, as we're sort of pausing to see if there's questions, the arborist report that was mentioned, thank you, Christian, for that. That will be made available on the web page, correct? Yep.
Yes, that will be posted next week with all the other materials.
Great.
All right, I'm not seeing any additional discussion, so let's roll into theme number 2. And if question comes up, we can always come back and ask later.
I saw one come through on the chat just now as you were talking, Jennifer, about are there any plans to plant new trees? I think there's definitely a possibility. And that's part of the larger discussion we're going to get into tonight about the overall approach to this park. So I would maybe think we could hold on that and maybe raise that again towards the end.
That sounds great. Thank you for that question. So theme 2, access. This image may look familiar to you. This was presented during our last workshop, but it was really important that this community wanted, the Squaw Mountain neighborhood wanted to keep this as a walk-in park, but also really wanted us to also improve the existing interior trails, as well as open up various access points to the neighborhood. And so this is just a refresher as to kind of where all of the entry points are right now to the park. We have one off of Kenya, off Mount McKinley. There's another trail that kind of goes further down this way into the woods. There's one that connects over this way. There's even a little trail that comes in through here. So this is just as a refresher. But as Jeff mentioned, one of the concerns we heard from you in your feedback was how can we get some access through Upper Hillside Cemetery? And as Jeff mentioned, there was some work that the cemetery board had done last year for some long-term planning. And one of the ideas they had was there's already somewhat of a social trail that comes through here, and that's just a trail that people make by walking over a space time and time again on their own. But there, how could we further connect from Olympus down here and connect through this buffer that in between what is going to be developed cemetery space and the neighbors, just to provide a soft surface trail for folks to access Hillside Park. So this is definitely something we can integrate into any future improvements, but just wanted to let you know we've heard you, and this is something we would definitely want to further explore should plans continue for the park space. So with that, I just want to again ask Hillside Park, just to orient you, is off to the side here. And there is a required 200-foot buffer between the cemetery and the open area at Hillside Park. So with that, do we have any questions about access to the park as one of the big themes? Did we hear or did we miss one? I see Connie has a question. Connie?
Okay, so in your, this is Connie Marsh. In your presentation, you indicated that there was substantial concern asking for more access, and then you talked about Hood, you talked about Kenya. You did not talk about improvements on those access trails or what that would be. You only talked about Hillside Park. And then you do realize that the one yellow line that you show going out of Hillside Park doesn't go back to the main trail, but drops out on people's graves directly. So your next step is a gravestone.
No, that would
So-
be, so Connie, that was an existing trail that is there now as we
I
would.
know, that's what I'm saying.
I know, and
So
I would
so-
like to clarify
And
that, so that is
I
an
thought,
existing.
can I just finish what I'm
Sure.
saying before you come back at me? So my concerns then, because this is when I get to talk, is that that first trail, the main trail that goes straight, does not pop out on people's graves. The little curvy trail that you show on your map as an informal existing trail actually just sort of can pop out right on the graves. And so I think we need to change some of those existing trails and reduce them too. So it's not just make more or more bigger, it's sort of more appropriate even for the existing trails. And then what I remember is some people's concerns with the trails that shoot off into the woods is some of those trails sort of end in people's backyards. And so you have to have appropriate, if you're going to have improvements there, appropriate improvements so that people don't start running across their backyards. And so that's sort of what I remember with public comment. And so, okay, now I'm done.
Thank you, Connie, for your comments, and I concur that we do not want any trails leading to any grave sites, and we would do what we could to correct those paths and direct them into appropriate spaces for access. Thank you for recognizing and bringing up that there are some trails that lead to people's backyards, and we would have to work on clarifying those to make sure that they're not cut-throughs for people who are using the park. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Jeff, did you have a question?
No, not a question. Thank you. And thanks, Connie, for the comments. Just, yeah, to clarify and confirm. Yeah, I think that the goal of this, whether it's Upper Hillside Cemetery, is really to formalize a trail. And by formalizing a trail, it probably means getting rid of some of those informal trails that we really don't want to function anymore. Looks like we have another question from the chat box. Could that trail going through the cemetery be dog friendly? Yes. Dog friendly as in dog on leash, since this is not an off leash area, but yes. Thanks, Ted.
Is there any more questions? Ted, did you have another question or are you good?
Yeah, I had one more question. Sorry.
Yes.
I did notice, to build upon the last person that was asking a question about the people's property. A lot of us kind of walk our dogs through the park, and I feel kind of bad because a couple of the people that are around that area don't have any kind of fencing or anything. So, a lot of dogs kind of run right through their yards and stuff. Would it be included in this? Is it the responsibility of the homeowner to build fencing around a park, or would there be some kind of fencing you guys are thinking of to help to isolate the park from, dogs running into their yards, which I imagine is frustrating for them as well?
That's a great point. Dogs are to be on leash in city unless in off leash areas. So we'd also want to maybe help educate some of the park users to keep their dogs on leash. But fencing is typically something that a property owner is responsible for if they wish to not have access there. But oftentimes people choose to also have no fence to allow views into the open park areas. So I think that's something that as we further plans or development of the park space, we can start looking at should improvements want to create a barrier somewhere, and we could help work with property owners.
I don't remember if there's a sign that says keep your dogs on a leash, but I noticed that a lot of people, when they do bring their dogs, they let them loose and kind of throw frisbees and all kinds of things. So maybe if I didn't see the sign, I've been going there for a while, maybe a good idea for you guys to put a sign so that it reinforces that correct behavior.
Yep. Thank you for that. And I will take that up with our park operations and see if we can get a sign up there.
Okay, thank you.
Jen, this is Jeff. We had another question. Dale, thanks so much in the chat box. So walking through the cemetery with a dog on leash will be allowed. I think what I was expressing and what we're trying to do is there is a 50-foot buffer area that is really not cemetery. That's between the neighborhood and the actual Upper Hillside Cemetery. Like what we're trying to seek and trying to achieve is, could we create a functional trail connection to Hillside Park that wouldn't necessarily go through the functional cemetery, but would go along the edge of it. So if we're able to accomplish that, that's what we've been talking here. That yeah, allowing a dog on leash through that, we think would be a good use. Corey has a question. Corey.
Corey Christensen. So on access, one thing that you've left totally out of your discussion is sidewalks on Mount Olympus. That came out as a high priority from the 2000 and whenever it was 14 or 16 meetings, and our last set of meetings, and from the discussions in whatever it was 2018 about the cemetery, because one of the problems with Hillside Park is it's a walk-in park that people don't feel it's safe to walk to. And I know the sidewalks are a little bit out of your park's range, but they need to be brought back in. And one of our problems is that, you know, we had a promise from the city dating back 30 years ago to get sidewalks in a loop up and over Squawk Mountain. And our last segments are the Mount Olympus and then 12th Avenue, which we lost when they decided to put in a $6 million project that redid all of the sidewalks and added street improvements with trees and bike lanes and all of that, which left us with previous projects that were in the 50,000, 100,000 range for just sidewalks, to now looking, you know, at a monolith of $6 million. And we really need just the sidewalks here to make it safe to walk to the park, and also to keep people out of the cemetery, walkers, I mean, because they don't have a choice. So I think that needs to be brought back in, because the city council, the public works department needs to know that we need our sidewalks, maybe just as a holder until they get their $6 million. But we can't just assume that the path through the cemetery is enough, which is a positive step, but not still enough. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Corey. Thanks.
I see we have one more question. Is there a possibility of setting aside time during the day to have off-leash time for dogs? That is a great question. We have been exploring off-leash dog parks and doing a tour of dog parks this year while we wait for a permanent dog park to be built here in the near future. And we have gone to 3 different sites throughout this year. And here in the upcoming months, we're going to be looking at surveys. You know, did these spaces work well? That we use the Pickering Farm yard out there, the big farm, big grassy area by Pickering Barn. We use Squaw Valley Park South, which has one of the mod soccer fields that was temporarily used. And right now, the temporary dog park is over by the Issaquah Community Center off the Rainier Trail at the location where the old skate park used to be. So we're going to be sending out survey to the community to see how well they functioned and also open up some other sites that may be a possibility. So that is certainly something that we could consider. I see Jeff would like to add on to that.
Sorry, Jen, I didn't want to interrupt you. Finish that thought. I was just going to say, Janet, it's a great question, and I think poses a really creative idea of how might we programmatically create off-leash dog opportunities and spaces throughout the park system. And yeah, just to reiterate what Jennifer is saying, we are all for trying to find creative solutions. And so if creating programmatic time slots is something that we see as effective or as a success other places, love to explore creative solutions like that.
Okay, if there's no further discussion on this topic, I think we'll move to topic number 3 to keep us on schedule here. So theme number 3, the field. As Jeff mentioned in the earlier slide with all 4 themes, there's a strong consensus amongst neighbors as well as survey respondents that there's a strong desire to keep the field functional, to improve the drainage on the field, to provide year-round use, and a strong consensus to keep it as open play space. Many comments also supported the importance of the field as a pickup play space, say that 3 times fast, for kids, as well as an area to walk and spend time with your dog, as we were just talking about. In order for us to understand why the wet field had water there and why it stayed wet for so long, we needed to rely on our environmental consultants, Herrera. And upon further investigation of the site, we found out that the reason that the field was wet is because it's a wetland. It has been delineated as an isolated Class 3 wetland with a habitat score of 5. And I know this news may come to surprise to many of you. It came as a surprise to us as well. And to help us understand some of the components of what makes a wetland, the wetland classification, I would like to invite our expert, George Richcott, Associate Scientist with Herrera, to help first walk us through and start breaking down some of this information for us. So with that, George.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So our staff delineated a small isolated wetland in the ball field here, and you can see the boundaries of the wetland in green there. It is a small wetland. It's about 1/6 of an acre, and it's a Category 3 wetland, which is a fairly low functioning wetlands. Wetlands are rated, the category is determined by the functions that a wetland provides, and those are water quality functions, hydrologic functions such as flood attenuation and erosion control, and then also the habitat functions. And as Jennifer mentioned, this wetland has a pretty low habitat score since it is isolated and it's in the middle of a mowed and maintained ball field. But it still does delineate as a wetland, and it is regulated by the regulatory agencies. And agencies that regulate wetlands in Washington State are the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Ecology, and the local jurisdiction, in which case is Issaquah. So that is the information on the wetland. I mean, it's common to find wetlands in Western Washington. It's a wet area, so any areas that receive the kind of precipitation that we get here tend to have a lot of wetlands in them, and we address wetlands all the time in our projects, and it just so happens we have one here in the ball field.
George, could you please explain what are the three elements and components of a wetland? What are the things that need to be there for it to be classified
Right.
as a
We've got three
wetland?
different parameters that need to be satisfied in order for an area to be determined a wetland. It has to meet the vegetation characteristics, the soil characteristics, and then the characteristics of the presence and activity of water. And how that is determined has been very rigorously um, resolved by agencies like the EPA and the Corps of Engineers and the Washington State Department of Ecology. So there are wetland rating forms that accompany this delineation where you have to demonstrate through soil characteristics and identifying the vegetation type and identifying wetland hydrology, the presence and action of water, that all those three parameters have been met to determine where the wetland boundary is. And you can see on this graphic here, those pink dots are soil pits that were dug to demonstrate that the wetland soils characteristics were met. And so within the green polygon here, we have a wetland soil pit, and outside the polygon, that SP2 is an upland soil pit. So you can demonstrate the wetland boundary, is somewhere between those based on the characteristics that you're observing at those different soil pits. And of course, we are digging more than just that one soil pit. The ones on here are the ones that we took very detailed data on, but during a delineation, wetland biologists are following this line of this polygon here to determine exactly where that boundary is.
And can you explain this blue line that's outside the green polygon?
Yes, the regulatory agencies have determined that in order to be protective of a wetland, you need a buffer around it, and that buffer width is assigned according to the wetland category or class. So as a class 3 wetland, this wetland has a 75-foot buffer. And so that is the buffer area around there that the agencies have determined should be protected in order to protect the qualities of the wetland.
And just to kind of also explain this graphic a little more, this purple line is in here is somewhat of the boundary of the mode area. We'll take another look at our next slide. And this kind of takes that shape of the wetland and its boundary and overlays it with some of the information we already have about the project site. All the trees that we showed you earlier, you can see where they reside. You can see how close the wetland boundary comes to the Mount McKinley entrance. You can see what is the ball field space, how much of the space that it takes. And what this means is the wetland really impacts our current use of the park. As George mentioned, a wetland requires protection and its buffer, and it may need to be fenced off in a usable park space like this in order to keep kids, people, and dogs out of the wetland. And also it means no use. We're not going to be able to walk through the field and play on it like we have been. This also really changes our city maintenance of the park. We're no longer able to mow that portion of the field, the wetland or the buffer. We're going to have to allow vegetation to continue to grow and for nature to take its course. And so we recognize we have a very new challenge on our hands that we would like to further talk about with you, and that is a wetland cannot be used as a playfield. So in determining this, we have really two bookend options that are available for us to consider in addressing this challenge. We can keep the wetland as is, or we can retain the field and conduct, which is allowed under regulatory authority, conduct a wetland mitigation, either relocation and or enhancement of the park. And we're going to walk through each of these options in a little more detail here. So option one, keep the wetland and buffer as is. As you could tell from the previous graphic, the majority of the park is no longer going to function either as a field, and many of the spaces that people walk and enjoy are also going to be impacted by the buffer. Vegetation will be allowed to grow, which is going to change the experience within the park. Future trail development and connectivity of the park is going to be impacted. Again, a challenge with some of the priorities the community has mentioned. And also the whole function of this park as the neighborhood park that we've known it to be is going to be impacted. The use that it's been for the past 30 plus years would change. But with option two, we could retain the field. We can also conduct, as I mentioned, under regulatory authority, wetland mitigation and or relocation with enhancement, and improve the field drainage. What this would do, it would retain the open field as the desired play space. This is allowed under city code to relocate. Relocation, as I mentioned, is done in conjunction with regulatory authority, but it would add cost and time to any project because you need to understand the drainage of the site. We need to do drawings and permit before any work could happen to do that. I know this has been a lot of information to take in. So really, we want to spend some time opening this up and allow for thoughts, questions, and feedback from you. As I said, we're not asking, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we're not asking for a definitive which way to go. We are going to have opportunity throughout the month, and we'll reiterate this again in our next steps to provide additional feedback and thoughts on what should happen here. But we really just want to talk and understand we have some competing values here. People love the park space, but we have a space that needs to be protected. And what can we do about it? So I'm going to open it up.
Yeah, we have a first question from Connie. Connie.
Okay, this is Connie again. And in your prior presentation, you had actually had wetland highlighted as one of the major impacts to the park, but you never discussed it in the last meeting. So I am not at all surprised to have this be a wetland. You discussed drainage going down the steep slopes on the other sides, but you delineated the wetland at that meeting. So it's wet year round. You have hydric soils. The question was not answered. Where is the water coming from? Is it spring fed? Is it being part of a drainage from somewhere else that is contributing to it? If it's bubbling up from the ground, that's like water in the park forever that you are then going to have to somehow shove off the hill. And remember, it can go to the cemetery. It can go basically into people's homes, because even when people cut trees in our town and up here on Squawk, people get water in their basements. So moving water on a hill like this is no easy feat. I reserve the right to ask more questions, but I'm just going to start with the one, which is, where's the water coming from?
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute there. I was just reviewing the delineation report, and I have to apologize. I was not the one who did the delineation. Two of our other biologists did the delineation, but one is getting married and one has a new child, so they couldn't be here tonight, unfortunately. But they determined that the source of the hydrology in the wetland is precipitation, so rain and occasional snow when we get that, as well as runoff from the surrounding hillsides.
Other questions, Connie?
Well, yes, I was just going to give somebody else an opportunity. Is anybody else asked? I can come back.
Okay, thanks. Ryan Olson, thanks for your question. How does the buffer and obviously wetland and buffer affect the dangerous trees?
Yeah, so buffers are regulated by the local jurisdiction, which in this case would be the city. So it would be the city to determine how mitigation should occur for impacts within the buffer. Typically, there is mitigation provided if there are impacts within the buffer. And if, for instance, if trees are removed, typically the mitigation for that would be to plant new trees. Typically, there would be some sort of mitigation ratio to offset there'd be temporal impacts resulting from the amount of time it would take for new trees to grow and provide some of that function, some of the habitat function, some of the water quality function that more mature trees provide. So you would be generally planting more trees or planting a larger area, or removing invasive species and planting native species. All of that gets worked out in the regulatory process, or in the permitting process. And so it's whatever the agencies or local jurisdiction, decides is an appropriate form of mitigation for those impacts.
Thanks, George. Ryan, does that answer your question? We'll say, assume yes, it does. You can certainly add a comment if it doesn't.
You mentioned that in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you. Look at me. I just got to read faster. Sorry, Ryan. Thanks. Question from Ted.
Yeah, hi again. My question is I'm trying to get a better idea of what the mitigation means. Like, in order for you to drain the field, does that mean, just to give me some idea here, is that would you have to build up the land in order to kind of drain it? Can you give me some ideas of what that would entail, just so I can get a better perspective on this option 2?
Sorry, if I can clarify, are you talking about how the field would be developed or drained to prevent the wetland from being there, or how you would?
Yeah, what does mitigation actually mean? And when you talk about drain and things like that, does it mean, because it's a lull in the land, right? And it just accumulates rainwater. So you would have to do something to put some, I don't know, what is mitigation, or what does drainage actually mean for that?
Right. So I mean, it sounds like we're kind of talking about two things. One is what we would do to develop the ball field to, if you were to maintain the ball field there and keep it there, in which case you're probably talking about something like placing additional fill material, like bringing in imported dirt fill and putting that on top of the ball field to raise it up a little bit and prevent it from being so wet, during the wet season. So you're essentially just increasing the elevation of the surface. You do still have water there that you would have to deal with somehow. So there would probably have to be some analysis as to where the water would go, what would be what would happen to it if you did that. So that's the development part of it. And then there's the mitigation part of it, which is then offsetting those impacts. So you would quantify what those impacts are to the wetland. And then there are several different options for how a wetland is mitigated. The city of Issaquah could develop a separate mitigation site on their own that they're responsible for. Perhaps there's another park area or natural area or plot of land that they own or could acquire where they could construct a wetland mitigation site that would be then protected in perpetuity. There are also options through King County's mitigation reserves program or in lieu fee program, goes by both names, where you can pay the county to do the mitigation for you, and that can be somewhat easier because then the county takes on the monitoring and other mitigation requirements that come with that sort of mitigation. There's also a wetland mitigation bank, which is kind of similar to the mitigation reserves program. It's a mitigation bank is an area that's been restored, and you can purchase credits from the bank, according to calculations and ratios that have been determined by the regulatory agencies. And again, it just means giving money, basically writing a check to a third party that provides the wetland mitigation. So those second two options tend to be a little bit easier.
Okay. Is that cost feasible? Can you estimate basically what cost feasibility is for something like that? Is for this option of the drainage versus keeping the wetlands there? Just to understand the context of just the overall bigger picture.
I don't know that off the top of my head. And so generally, yes, these are cost feasible, but there is a cost, like within the realm, it's within the realm of, possibility. But
Yeah.
I don't know what the implications are to the city. And so I can't speak to that for this particular project.
Are you asking for us feedback on option 1 versus option 2 in this call, or is it just questions on your plan?
As we said at the beginning, Ted, yeah, understanding probably most of it's going to be questions and feedback. If you have feedback or preference, you can certainly let us know that now. We're not expecting it nor requiring it tonight, right?
Okay.
There's going to be more conversation as we go through the weeks and the weeks ahead.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. David had a question in the chat box. I think maybe a historical comment / question. The field was bulldozed into place, was it not? I honestly don't know that. I think what I understand historically, this was done before the city received it as a park. This field space was created as that Squaw Mountain neighborhood was developed. Certainly feel free to phone a friend if anybody has a little bit more understanding or knowledge of that history. Oh, I hear someone. You're muted. Oh. Oh, still muted, unfortunately. Why don't we jump to the next question? Can just the wetland be fenced without the buffer like at Lake Samammer State Park, which would leave more walking play area?
I could speak a little bit to that. Like I mentioned, the buffers, so that is an option. Buffers are regulated by the city of Issaquah, so it's up to the city to determine what activities are allowable within that buffer. And I'm sorry, I'm not completely up on Issaquah City Code, and I don't know if anybody else on the call can speak to what uses are allowed within the buffer. Sometimes trails are allowed within the buffer, so that is an option, and it might require some sort of mitigation, buffer mitigation, as I mentioned before, but that is usually allowable under different local jurisdiction codes.
Yep, and we've had some initial conversations with planning and permitting about this, and yeah, using the buffer as a field and continuing to mow it and manage it would not be an allowable use under our code. To the degree that yeah, we might be able to have trails in the outer portion of the buffer. That's a possibility, but again, would need to be mitigated as well.
Hey Jeff, there's a comment that I apologize, I missed it on my end, didn't come to everyone, from David Kapler. He just would like to ask a wetland question. David?
Is this bothering you? I'm listening to a web meeting. I'm sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things.
Okay. Uh-oh. So David Kapler has a question. Is that what you got, Thomas?
Okay.
David.
I assume I'm being heard. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Thank you. I guess, this park we're concentrating all the talk about a very small portion of this park. It goes down the hill a long distance. There's literally acres, I would imagine, of wetland, or at least wetland buffer down at the bottom and across the hillside. There's big patches of Devil's Club. We got springs. We can have the opportunities here to do some tremendous mitigation of existing wetlands that could be high quality in terms of their habitat value, and which this wetland, it's always going to be pretty limited on what it can be done habitat value, because I don't think it's going to have any water in the summer, for one thing. Whereas down below where we have the springs coming out of the hillside in places, we're going to see water there year round, and already have great vegetation down there, but we also have a lot of ivy and other invasives. So, and I think if we had to go out and hire somebody to go down and do all that restoration down there in those wetlands and get things fixed up down there, it would cost a fortune. But I also think that we could get a community initiative here to, if we got to do something here to keep our field and have that amenity, we need to then deal with the ivy and the wetlands down below and mitigate the loss of this upper wetland. Now, Connie might think we got to keep it, but I just don't see this, even if it's kept, as being a significant wetland in terms of, and I think we got some really good stuff down below that would have real habitat value. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We have a question from Corey.
So I have a comment. Yeah, a couple of comments.
Okay.
Question.
Yep.
First comment, I thought the consultants did a nice job of delineating the area that's the actual wet area with the green part that is the wetland, and that's become more pronounced actually in the last 5 to 10 years, but they did a nice job of capturing the wet area. Historically, I've done some research on the park, and the flat field area is fill from the creation of the Mountain Park Estates neighborhood. And that leads to a question, and that's with the consultants, how far down did you go to get to below the fill? Because part of one of the comments somebody made at the last meeting was that the wetland has gotten wetter in the last 5 to 10 years. And so what that might tell me is that they dumped the dirt originally 50 or 60 years ago on top of an existing wetland, and nature has just sort of been taking its course. And so the question is what's going on down there, and have we looked into that? And then lastly, as far as the number 2 option, maybe for the next meeting, you can give us just some, broad-based cost numbers without, spending a lot of money on that, just so we can understand what we're talking about there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's our hope, Corey. That last comment. Thanks for that. George, anything to add in terms of further sort of analysis?
I don't know about the history of the wetland and the placement of fill. It's entirely possible that fill was placed on top of an existing wetland when this was initially developed, 50 years ago or whenever that happened. And then the wetland, now a wetland is forming on top of that fill. That happens fairly frequently. I can tell you that when our biologists were in the field, they dug their soil pits down to about 17 inches. But they only needed to dig as far as to go as to determine the presence of wetland hydrology. So once they got that information, they were able to determine that it was a wetland. And so I can't tell you if they dug past an old fill layer down to a previous wetland. I'd have to do a little more investigation to analyze that, but they went far enough to determine that it is a wetland.
So that would take some additional work, it sounds like. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what additional information that would get you besides just some historical context.
All right, thank you for all these questions. I'm trying to track as we go here. If this is an artificial landscape, does that affect its wetland determination?
That does not. So the fact that it's a mowed and maintained ball field does not mean that it can't still also be a wetland. So unfortunately.
It is what it is.
Yep.
Next question, what's the safety of the mitigation? If it fails, there are a lot of homes around the park that might get damaged by water.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe this is referring more to developing the play
Mhm.
field. You know, if you keep the play field and then, move water off the play field, then what happens to that water and what is the potential for effects to the homes around the park? And that's certainly something that would need to be addressed in any plan that keeps the ball field. If you do develop that, what would happen to the water? So it would require a little bit more hydrologic analysis to determine whatever plan the community comes up with, make sure that the water is addressed properly so that it does not affect any surrounding homes.
Yeah, and I would just add to that comment, George, if this is something that we were to pursue, yeah, obviously the design of any solution to keep that as a field and either build it up or address drainage, we would need to address that drainage on site within the design and within the permit for that. We would not be moving water to adjoining parcels or neighbors. David made a more of a comment of the Eversoggy Cemetery. Some of the water issues there, I think you're referring to, David. Reminding us to check King County LiDAR site to see how natural this ballpark landscape is. David, I think you might be referring to historically how natural this landscape is.
There's a comment, further comment down below. I think it was just referring to not just the mowing regime, but that the likely possibility that the field was artificially leveled. So does that artificial grading create that wet condition, and does that impact the delineation? I think the answer is still the same, George, but you can maybe
Correct.
just
Yeah.
clarify that.
Does not affect the delineation. Yeah, it's still delineates as a wetland.
It is what it is. Yeah. Connie, some additional questions?
All right, so I love me a good wetland delineation, but this is the presentation is skimpy for me. Precipitation and drainage from the hill, and you dug 17 inches deep, and so I don't know if you visually noted the ditch coming down Mount McKinley and tracked that into the field, and you noticed some till layers that create sort of a perched wetland on this field. So to get to hydric soil, I'm not surprised. Now, if the whole field is built the same, could you adjust the placement of the wetland in the area rather than and the shape of the field, and get further, because like a wetland mitigation takes a 5-year monitoring and maintenance period, and the wetland banks are very expensive. And so now you're looking at heaps of money. And so a boring to understand, or two uphill and field borings to understand how deep the fill is, what the fill is made of, and whether there are other till layers in there that will forever keep the water from going into the ground, I think are gonna be necessary to even understand next steps. So how much money are we willing to spend in identifying this wetland and what can happen? Is this going to go to city council? Because basically you don't have that much money for park improvement anyway, and you could easily spend $150,000 just on studying and design of this. So maybe your wetland delineation will give enough, but from your read of it, can you understand what the rest of the field is and exactly where the water is coming from uphill or from the surrounding areas?
I'm sorry, I have to check with our biologists who delineated the wetland as to whether or not they noticed the ditch and the till layer, and you know, to the extent that information was incorporated into the delineation. I mean, they did investigate that entire field. You saw the polygon of the study area, and that was presented in one of the previous slides. So they looked at that, but I'm not sure about information surrounding areas. So I'd have to get back to you on that.
In your 17-inch test pits, do you give a description in your report of the soil layers in the test pits?
We do in both the upland and wetland test pit.
Okay, and you only did 2, so you didn't do a
Correct.
side test pit. So
It's possible. I mean, it's likely, almost certain that there were other informal test pits, because we'll go around the boundary of a wetland with either a shovel or an auger probe to look at soil characteristics along that entire perimeter. But typically in the delineation reports, only you know, it depends on the size of the wetland and the category of the wetland, but typically only the one upland and one wetland soil pit are presented in the wetland report. So I'd have to check with our biologists as to how many other pits they dug or how many other borings they took with the auger to determine wetland soil characteristics around the rest of that boundary.
okay, and so then this is a question, now that we know it's a class 3 wetland with a 75-foot buffer, what are you going to do for maintenance of this area from now on?
Currently, Connie, your question, we are not mowing it. So as we have this community conversation, as we do this, we are changing our maintenance patterns of that park now, currently.
Since we have a pause, I just want to be mindful of time. We have 12 minutes left, and I want to be really respectful of everyone's time. Happy to spend a couple more minutes on this topic. I see we have a couple more people who would like to make comments, but let's try and speed it up. The last little bit will not take us that long. So, see, I see Paul Winterstein would like to make a comment. Paul?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Jen. Can you hear me?
I can, thanks.
Oh, okay, great. I'm going to go back to David Kapler's comments earlier. I think he really points out something that I would like to see explored. It is a shock to see that there was a wetland there. I'm not surprised, but the fact that it's got a formal designation, I mean, we all know if you've been there, there's water. It's clear that it's the cut from uphill there's probably clay close to the surface. There's something, funneling that water down that hill. But the idea that going forward from here and we would lose a lot of current functionality and use and value of that park by not doing mitigation, I wouldn't be in favor of that. I think an open space like that is very rare. A level open space like that really doesn't exist anywhere else within the proximity of our neighborhoods around here. And so doing some type of mitigation so that we could, retain that, that's an option I would really like to see us pursue. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a comment about the cost of mitigation being a non-starter. Again, we don't yet have valuation on what the actual costs would be to do that. As we further design and get further design direction, we would be able to provide that information, but at this time we really can't. How big is the wetland? It's 0.14 acre, and yes, no mowing. Any other further questions on this topic before we move on? Like we said, we'll have more opportunity. Are there other comparable spaces in Issaquah recent history? Comparable as to how? Are you thinking of a field that's wet that has been determined as a wetland? Help me out here. Wetland status? Yeah, we have a lot of wetlands in Issaquah and many wetlands that the city manages right now. Not all of them are accessible to people, but we do have several with the over 1,600 acres of open space and protected open space. We have a lot of wetlands that we manage and take care of in Issaquah. Like we said at the beginning, this was a surprise to us to realize that a historical field has now become a wetland. You know, we were asked to discover why the water was there, and much to our surprise, we found a wetland. So thank you for those comments. So if you have additional comments on this topic, please keep putting them in the chat. We are going to save the chat for tonight. So please keep adding them on. I am going to, in the respect of time, continue through just our last couple of slides, and bear with me. I'm going to fly through them so we can get to our next steps slide. So theme 4 we heard was about additional play amenities. And some of the topics we heard from community meeting number 1, as well as some of the survey topics, were all about play character and experience, but also special features that people would like to see in a play space, which included accessibility, inclusiveness, fitness, family play, exploration and plantings, as well as art experience, and even some potential site locations. This is just a reminder of some of the play experience and graphics. I know sometimes we forget what it was we took the survey on or what those images were. So this was just kind of a refresher. And also another refresher email from the online surveys as well as the community meeting as to what potential areas we were going to explore for play, a potential play space, knowing retention of the field was important. With that, and hearing from the community how important it was that the play be very different at Hillside Park, and not be like any other park, but also be very low key, be very respectful of the environment, be not visually impactful from neighbors or surrounding neighbors, and that it fit into the natural character of the environment. Mithun put together just a couple of slides, and this is one slide that is really the results of some of the survey feedback that we received about what type of play is accommodating in this space from your feedback. And I'm going to let Christian just add a couple more comments on the next 2 slides here.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm just noticing a question about the play area with regard to the wetland restriction, so I might just answer that first. We don't have an overlay map that clearly shows it, but 2 of the potential play areas, including the one that was an open right field, are now in the buffer. So there's some impact there, obviously. And then the only one that's outside of the buffer is the one down the hill, which is then surrounded by a number of those trees that we were discussing that could present higher risk or require mitigation in some way to reduce risk. So there are some constraints to the play area as well as the play field. There's an overall constraint to play based on a lot of these environmental characteristics that we have to carefully weigh. And not to spend too much time on these, but these are just highlighting some of the ideas that sort of rose to the top in the survey feedback we got. If there was play, this idea of really strong natural and low-key integration of elements into the natural landscape, dispersing it and sizing it correctly so that it really has very minimal visual impact and doesn't concentrate activities and high energy and noise in one particular location. We have essentially because of all this other work, we've hit with the pause button on design or even developing this any further beyond what you already responded to in the survey. So this is really just to remind everyone that this is kind of where we're at right now. We go to the next slide. And this is just a couple more examples of some of the elements that we think resonated with folks when we talk about low-key, natural type play in this space. This is some of the things that we have in mind that might be implemented that would help us achieve that balance that Jeff was mentioning of trying to find a win-win solution that provides some of those amenities, but in a way that's very low impact. So again, these aren't new design ideas, just something to keep in mind as we talk about next steps. And I'll turn it back over to you, Jennifer, and we'll come back to questions and next steps, I think.
Great. Thank you, Christian. So again, as Christian mentioned, you know, we want to seek a win-win. We heard your comments. We want things to fit in the community, park and be used by everyone. But we also hear there's real concern, and we want to try about change to the park as it is. And regardless of where we go with the wetland, you know, it's important for the neighborhood to know that there's been a mixed response in reaction to the introduction of play. Obviously, knowing there's a wetland changes some of that conversation a bit. But regardless, we want to seek a win-win. We hear your concerns, but we also know there's a lot of neighbors that would like to have some additional play opportunities for their growing families. And we want to be very sensitive to the neighborhood desires. Again, be very careful and, you know, place any potential play space to be visually respectful and fit within the natural environment and spatial, and also use some natural materials. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip having discussion on this at this time. We're not, as Christian mentioned, we're not furthering design until we come to some direction as to what we're going to do with the wetland, being that is so impactful to the site itself. So really, I want to hit on some next steps. We're going to offer an on-site open house up at Hillside Park on June 23rd from 3:30 to 6:30 in the evening. This is going to provide an opportunity for you to meet with us out on site and see for yourself the impacts that the wetland and the buffer may have on the park space. Talk about any concerns or tree health that you may have. And then we're also going to share this news of the wetland with the park board at their June 28th and provide them the same update that we have given you tonight. As mentioned, all the materials tonight, as well as the wetland report and the arborist report, will get posted to our web page. And as we submit a permit set going forward, whether it's to deal with the wetland or keep the wetland as is, or add play, should we pursue development in any form, all of this information will have to be submitted as part of that. But we continue to want to seek a balanced solution with you, the community, as we continue to determine this project scope, as we finalize it throughout the summer, as we work through some of these hurdles and conflicting interests. And also, as we had mentioned, as part of this process, we have to be very cognizant of our environmental conditions out there, and we'll continue to do that. But any future project work, as Jeff mentioned in the intro, isn't even considered until potentially 2022, pending further direction as to how we'll address the wetland. And always, please feel free to contact me, the project manager, if you know of someone who missed tonight's presentation, we'll be able to share that with them. But please feel free to contact me. We can stay here, and I see there's a couple more questions, but just want to really thank everyone for joining us tonight to have these conversations, to listen to the feedback that's been received, as well as your attention to detail and questions regarding the wetland and really what that means. We thank you for that. It's going to be really important to have your feedback continuing going forward. And with that, I just want to offer, Jeff, do you have any parting words?
No, just thank you. Thank you very much. I can say, I'll say this, I guess, really quickly. Historically, at least for me in my professional career of 20 years as being a park director in 3 different cities, this is a first for me. To have a park that has an existing use, an existing function, and then working through a designation of a class 3 wetland. This isn't easy, and I so appreciate just the initial questions that you all have. We really want to explore this further with you. This does have impacts on the current use and current function of that park, as well as any future use of the park. And so this is your neighborhood park, and so we want to embark on this conversation and embark on finding solutions, identifying what option we want to go with together. So thanks a lot for the beginning of this conversation.
And with that, everyone have a great evening, and we'll be in touch. And please check the webpage, or feel free to email me at any time. Have a
Thanks,
great
guys.
evening.
It was really good. Thanks for the presentation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.